So Tulsi Gabbard once again proved that she is a legislative juggernaut with the piece of legislation that she just introduced. Let's talk about it. So, Tulsi Gabbard just introduced legislation to reinstitute the fairness doctrine. And really quick, I want to show you all or tell you all a little bit about the doctrine, or at least her bill, and then give you some background information on why this is so important. Now, weirdly enough, no one has co-sponsored this legislation. She introduced it on September the 19th, 2019. And last time I checked, we do have progressives in office, in Congress. And even if they aren't progressive, we have a lot of people in Congress who complain that Fox News doesn't offer enough opposing viewpoints. And we have people on the right who say organizations like CNN, MSNBC are quote unquote fake news. Adam Schiff would be one of them. And yet, oh, excuse me, Adam Schiff is one of the ones who promotes fake news. But he complains all too often about how the right is just, or Fox News is just in the business of promoting the GOP, which may or may not be true. But if that's the case, then why are we not seeing a backing of a bill like this? So it says that the bill is to amend the Communications Act of 1934 to reinstate the obligation of broadcast licensees to afford reasonable opportunity for the discussion of conflicting views on issues of public importance, commonly known as the Fairness Doctrine. Now, what is it asking to do? It wants to amend it to say the public interest obligation to cover publicly important issues. A broadcast licensee shall afford a reasonable opportunity for the discussion of conflicting views on issues of public importance. The enforcement and application of the requirement imposed by this subsection shall be consistent with the rules and policies of the Commission in effect on January 1987, including Section 73.1920 and 73.1930, relating to the personal attacks and political editorials, respectively, of Title 47, Code of Federal Regulations, as it is in effect on such a date. So this is huge. This is huge. Because not only do we need more parity when it comes to the media. Nina Turner talked about this, right? She said that it's ridiculous that we can have 3 or 4 people go on and bash Bernie Sanders without having Nina as a representative for the campaign, or even Bree Joy Gray, who is the national press secretary for the campaign, or having someone who just likes Bernie Sanders. Nina Turner talks about this often. This is something that we've seen in the media. When we're talking about politicians specifically, this is something that we have seen in the media, people, all too often throughout this election and 2016. When they weren't ignoring Bernie in 2016, 2015, they were smearing him. A lot of the people always said that Bernie never got black support, and they said it's because black people just didn't like him. And I'm here to tell you, as a person who's part of the campaign, that's not true. In 2015, 2016, black people simply had no idea who he is and who he was, until the middle of the election season. But by that time, it was too late. It had already, the places where he needed it the most, which would have been the Southern Firewall during that Super Tuesday, it was too late. He was unknown until he was known, but he didn't get those votes. And I've always said that that is a form of voter suppression, and it should have been illegal because it was by design. Ed Schultz was called by MSNBC and was told not to cover his campaign. We all remember that. He left MSNBC and then he ended up going to RT before he was taken away from us all too soon. So This is something that has been the norm. Think about how they've treated Tulsi Gabbard, literally reading off of a piece of paper for talking points. Think about how Tulsi was covered after she crushed Kamala in that debate. Think about it. Aside, 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 aside. And speaking of the Assad issue, why hasn't there been any real discussion from the other side? When we're talking about Venezuela and Maduro, why hasn't there been any real discussion from the other side? Why haven't people like Max Blumenthal, Aaron Matei, and others been invited to counter some of the points that are being made? Now, why is this even necessary? First of all, well, let me tell you. So, the FCC actually eliminated this policy in 1987. However, the House and the Senate, before they were completely and totally corrupt, actually tried to preempt this because obviously there were political murmurs that this was going to happen. So earlier that year, around April, the House introduced the same exact thing, actually, that Tulsi is introducing, which is great. It shows that Tulsi does her homework. Oftentimes I hear Tulsi say during interviews, hey, I'm not really I don't know a lot about it, but I'll study it and figure it out. And clearly she has been studying. So this was done around April, passed in the House in about June, and then it was passed in the Senate. So what's the problem, right? I feel like this is pretty obvious. We want fairness in our media, and mostly everyone should agree because we don't want to see biases from either side running rampant. Yeah, you would think that, except for the fact that Ronald Reagan vetoed it that same year. Now, I'll get into the reasons why Ronald Reagan claimed to have vetoed it. Well, he didn't veto it, but his claims as to why he vetoed it. But I should say that the Supreme Court mostly agrees with Congress because the Supreme Court ruled, and they said in 1969 that the fairness doctrine should be upheld, and it was red line broadcasting versus the FCC, and it upheld the decision that the FCC does have a right to enforce the fairness doctrine. Now, their decision, they said, was based off of the scarcity of the broadcast spectrum. Now, I personally believe that that is still the case, by the way. There is a scarcity of the broadcast. Don't confuse scarcity of the broadcasting spectrum with a lack of places or shows that you have access to. That's two different things. There is still a scarcity of the broadcast spectrum. For example, we do know that 4 companies basically control all of the media. And that seems to be dwindling down more and more every single day. On top of that, we have monopolies like YouTube and Facebook, both of which have connections to the CIA's venture capitalist firm, InQtel. And those monopolies are actively controlling what people can and can't see based off of what they feel is best for them to see. And some people say it has to do with their bottom line. I doubt that. I seriously do. But so you have that issue. Then on top of that, you have the repeal of net neutrality, which allows the throttling of data, having to pay more for access to faster data. Things, that, and that's, we're seeing the effects of it, by the way, every single day. For example, AT&T has introduced these different tiers of data plans. Because of that, people are having even less access to true independent content. So the Supreme Court's decision and the reasoning for that decision still holds true today, which is exactly why this fairness doctrine should be amended. Now, what was Ronald Reagan's logic? Well, you let me know if he was full of it, people. This type of content-based regulation by the federal government is, in my judgment, antagonistic to the freedom of expression guaranteed by the First Amendment. Reagan said it. He said this in his veto message. And then he said, in any other medium besides broadcasting, such federal regulation, such federal policing of the editorial judgment of journalists would be unthinkable. Okay, now this is 1987. How many mediums were there? I think that there was literally broadcasting and writing. And there were laws in place and regulations in place against propaganda, and we call those libel, or excuse me, not libel, slander. Or is it libel? No, it's libel. Libel's for writing. Yeah. So like you can't just say whatever you want to. So there are regulations there. You can be held accountable for violating those regulations in that medium. So Reagan, once again, proving that he is a puppet and was full of it. Now, I also think it should be said that he says this type, the government should not be involved in. Understand something, people. The moment that you apply for a license for something, because it didn't say, oh, if you don't do this, you're going to be put in jail if you violate this regulation, if you violate the fairness doctrine. All the fairness doctrine said was that, hey, you violated, we're taking away your broadcast license. You're not going to be You're not going to be. I don't want to say penalized, because you're still going to be penalized. You're not going to be criminalized for violating it. However, like your driver's license, like your barber's license, like there's every type of business license. You have certain rules you have to follow to maintain the good of public interest. These are the facts. So this legislation that Tulsi introduced is even more important, not only because of the FCC repealing it, but also Obama signing into law the NDAA of 13. It was 2013, and he signed into law it was HR 4310. And HR 4310, although it's a National Defense Authorization Act, they slip a lot of things in there. A lot of pork barrel, a lot of underhanded BS, because they know that 9 times out of 10, and until recently 10 times out of 10, it's always going to get passed, because the one branch of our economy that we will always make sure is funded is the military. Well, not actual people in the military, but all the bombs we pay for. We're going to make sure all that stuff is funded. So this was snuck in to the National Defense Authorization Act of 2013. And it was called the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act of 2012. This is what it said. Now, PolitiFact argued, this doesn't legalize propaganda. What are you talking about? Or domestic propaganda specifically, by the way. What are you talking about? No, it doesn't. This is around that time where PolitiFact started just doing the opposite of dropping the facts. Oh, and by the way, this PolitiFact article was from 2019. So, ironically enough, kind of bolstering the reality that this definitely legalized propaganda. So, just want to be clear about that. So, in that NDAA, Section 1078 says this, and I will let you be the judge. Let's see if we're crazy or PolitiFact is full of it as usual. It says, revises the provisions of the United States Information and Educational Exchange Act of 1948. This is also known, once again, as the Smith-Edmund Act. It says that, and it was authorizing that act that I just told you about, was authorizing the Secretary of State and the Broadcasting Board of Governors to provide for preparation and dissemination of information intended for foreign audiences abroad about the United States, including about its people and policies through press publications, radio, motion pictures, the internet, and other information media, including social media, and through information centers and instructors. It authorizes the secretary and the board to make available in the United States motion pictures, films, videos, audio, and other materials disseminated abroad pursuant to such act, and the United States International Broadcasting Act of 1994, the Radio Broadcasting Act, the Radio Broadcasting to Cuba Act of Television Broadcasting to Cuba Act, amends the Foreign Relations Authorization Act of fiscal years 1986 and 1987 to remove statutory limitations on the ability of the board and the State Department to provide information about their activities to the media, the public, and Congress. So, there you have it. Does that sound like a legalization of propaganda to you? Sounds like a legalization of propaganda to me. I'm just saying. And considering the horrible turn we saw in 2015, whether you want to talk about, once again, the Bernie Sanders campaign and how they were treated by Hillary Clinton and literally every single piece of liberal media, if you want to talk about Russiagate and the lies that were the literal lies that would have and should have resulted in their license being taken, their broadcasting licenses being taken away from them if the fairness doctrine was actually pushed and kept, on top of a litany of other issues, including the supposed Syrian gas attacks that were later debunked, that people like Rand Paul had actually spoke out against from the very beginning, but yet they were still pushing this idea, like Rand Paul isn't a senator who wouldn't put his career on the line for something like that unless he had very good reason to believe that the Syrian gas attacks were not legitimate. And he was right. So this is simply, in my opinion, another example of Tulsi getting down to the root of the issues. Another example of, once again, how she's a legislative juggernaut. And now, if you're a Bernie supporter who hates the way that Bernie is treated by the media, this is something you need to be talking about often. This is something you need to be tagging your Congress people, your senators in, and say, hey, we need to push this. This is something we need to get them to introduce in the Senate. Right? I think we all agree. This is something that needs more legs. Also, as far as Tulsi is concerned, this is absolutely more proof that she is ready to take on the battles that many people have been avoiding. This is proof that she is willing to deal with the root causes of our issues rather than ignore them and pretend like they don't exist. So, once again, showing she's ready to be the commander-in-chief and the president of the United States of America by leading the charge, which is dope. Here, we have always tried to have opposing views on. You know, I'm all about debating. I'm all about I have conservatives on as well as progressives, even if I don't always agree with the conservatives. And this is something that you all have applauded and asked for more of. And as you can see, and if you've been part of our network for some time, at least in the last 2 or 3 years, you've seen where we'll learn things from the quote unquote right that we would have never known if we've only stuck in our leftist bubble. Now imagine that on a grander scale, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, etc. It's important, especially when we're talking about the personal ad hominem attacks on politicians rather than focusing on the substance of policy. So thank you all so much for tuning into that segment of Mi Casa es Su Casa. And always remember, more than anything else, people, find your balance. Peace. Hey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you like that segment of Mi Casa es Su Casa. Also, you can help us upgrade the studio and take this show on the road to cover the on-the-ground politics that you love by clicking on that GoFundMe link in the description and donating literally anything. Anything helps. Also, you can follow us on Rockfin, on Twitter, and on Facebook as well. And hey, more than anything else, people, always remember, find your balance. Peace.